What's up, guys? Before I get too far into this video, I have to give a special thanks to my buddy Forrest, who is responsible for that gorgeous B-roll that you just saw. I'm going to go ahead and link his channel down in the description below. He also took some amazing photos of the build. That's going to be linked down below as well. I posted them up on my website, so if you guys want to see some awesome shots, definitely encourage you to check that out. And I'm going to give another shout out to my buddy Randy with Architectural Elements. He's the one that fabricated that beautiful walnut front panel for the build. We already did a video on that, so if you'd like more information, I encourage you to check that video out. And I'm also going to link his Instagram profile in the description below. Now, with that out of the way, guys, this has been a project that has been in the works for the better part of a year. I came up with the original idea to incorporate wood into a custom PC somehow. And this is my own personal rig. And for myself, I wanted to create, for lack of a better term, the classiest or most sophisticated looking build out there. I really like the idea of combining different elements like wood, aluminum, glass, water, brass. So that's how I came up with the idea to call this build Project Element. Now, I know I've been teasing this build for a while, and technically it was done a couple months ago, but when I got to a point where it was quote-unquote finished, there were a few things that I wasn't 100% satisfied, and after putting that much time and effort into a build, I really wanted to make sure that I was 100% satisfied with the finished product. So, I made a couple changes, still wasn't happy, made a couple changes, and finally arrived at what I considered to be the final product of my original vision. Now, like most of my other build videos, I'm going to grab the camera, I'm going to give you guys a tour of the entire build. But before I do that, I'd just like to thank you guys for checking out this video and all my previous videos. Got a lot of new exciting content coming up, and I do really appreciate you guys subscribing and, engaging in discussion with some of these builds. I love answering your questions. So, as always, if you have any questions that I didn't happen to answer in this video, feel free to ask in the comments section below. And without further ado, let's go ahead and check out Project Element. Starting with the outside of the case, this is the Fantex Evolve Micro ATX Tempered Glass Edition. Obviously has the modified front panel. The only other modification I made to the case on the outside was the case comes with these, I guess for cosmetic purposes, these little circular grill looking sort of things in here. I went ahead and peeled those out to try to improve airflow. It looked like those little strips were at least blocking a third of the airflow coming out of these vents. I don't really know how much of a difference it made because I didn't do testing before and after. I'm only assuming that it made a difference, but anything that you can do to help with airflow in this particular case, I'm sure is going to help. And as I discussed in the original video where we talked about the wood front panel, this design did open up much larger gaps along the side here. So again, I can only assume that we've improved airflow going into the case. So let's go ahead and take a look inside. So the other obvious modification that you've probably already noticed is I removed the basement shroud, whatever you want to call it, from the case. The main reason I did that is I wanted to show off every single component in this build. Most people love having that basement because it gives them a way to hide a bunch of crap underneath. But one of my goals for this build was for it to be so quote-unquote perfect that I had nothing to hide. So yeah, I went ahead and drilled out the rivets, popped the basement out. It did lose some structural rigidity, I'm not going to lie. However, when all of the components are installed and the panels are on, it feels very solid. But if you plan on doing that sort of mod in your own build, just be prepared for the potential to, sort of mess up the structural rigidity of the case. Now, as far as the water cooling goes, as you can see here, I've used all Bits Power fittings. These are shiny silver. I went with shiny silver this time instead of black sparkle like I normally use because I wanted to match the polished brass tubing in here, which is also Bits Power. Now, working with this tubing, it wasn't really difficult. I mean, you can easily cut the tubing with a pipe cutter, and you can sand and round over the edges pretty easily. The trickiest part is that it's hard, so cutting through it takes quite a bit longer than when you're cutting through PETG or acrylic, but it's a little bit more expensive. It's not terribly expensive, but what I would recommend and what I did is before you go cutting your brass tubing, create the entire loop from either PETG or acrylic so that you're not wasting any brass needlessly, because you'll just use that tubing as sort of a template to cut the brass. Now, I've gone with all fittings in this build. You can buy pre-bent brass tubing, but you know, I like the look of all these fittings. It was expensive, but I'm really happy with the way the look turned out. And I've got the EK water blocks on both the CPU and the graphics card. And I went with the acrylic blocks just because I wanted to be able to see the movement of the fluid, although you can't see it in that block because it's underneath. But in this one, it was important to me to be able to take advantage of being able to see this coolant. This is the Primo Chill View. This is sterling silver. I went ahead and used acrylic on these tubing runs here to also showcase the movement of the fluid. You know, as far as I'm concerned, if you've got fluid that shows off this really neat characteristic, you might as well take advantage of that and showcase it as much as you can. Now, originally I did all brass tubing, and I really like the look of it, but again, I'm really happy with the mix of both acrylic and the brass. Custom sleeving I did myself as always. Went ahead and tried something new and different. So far, I haven't seen it on any other builds, but that's using brown sleeving. Now, I can understand why most people would not be chomping at the bit to sleeve their cables brown, but obviously, I wanted to sort of tie in the color of the front panel into the inside of the build. I purposely did not comb any of the cables. I wanted to go with a more raw and sort of organic kind of look to the cables. I like when the cables aren't combed. I comb them in most of my builds, but I don't know. There's just a neat characteristic to the cables when they're allowed to sort of lay over one another. I spent probably a stupid amount of money on the power supply, and I'll be honest with you, the reason I did that is I just like the way it looked. You know, it was important to me, as I mentioned before, that every aspect of this build fit the theme, and there was no other power supply on the market that fit the theme better than this one here. I mean, it's a great power supply, so you know, maybe I got my money's worth, but I really kind of spent more than I needed to just for the looks. But yeah, aside from that, you know, as you can see, coming up with the tubing runs was a little bit of a challenge. You know, now that you're seeing it finished, it looks like it makes sense, and it does, but I can promise you coming up with the optimal layout, especially with how tight it was down in this section here, was a little bit of a challenge, but you know, that's just part of the fun of doing these builds, guys, is, you know, coming up with an idea and then seeing it through and trying to make it work. So that's where I get my own satisfaction from doing these builds. I've got the drain valve hidden back there as well as the temperature sensor. So you can see more photos of that stuff when you click the link and look at the photos. But aside from that, pretty straightforward. When I want to fill and, you know, drain the loop, I just pull the panel off the front and it gives me access to the drain valve. And then I have the fill valve back here. Now, I have to turn the case, I guess we would call it sideways, or, you know, set it on the front in order to do that, but it's no big deal. This loop actually fills and drains pretty easily. As I've discussed in a previous video, as long as you lay out the loop properly, you can get it to drain pretty easily. So, yeah, I'm just going to kind of take some slow shots here so that you guys can try to see some of the details of what's going on in here. Actually, let me go ahead and just go through the loop order. I've got the reservoir horizontally mounted, feeding the pump. Then it crosses back through there with several different junctions to incorporate the drain valve and the temp sensor. Goes into the front radiator and then back out, up, over, and into the CPU block. From there, over and up into the top radiator. Then it comes down over into the graphics card, and then from the graphics card back into the reservoir. So pretty straightforward. Again, if you guys have any questions regarding the loop or working with any of these materials, feel free to ask. I'm going to go ahead and turn this around so I can show you guys the back, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So unlike the full-size version of the Fantex Evolve, the back glass on this particular case has sort of a black silk screen, so it doesn't show off the entire back like the other one does. So you may think, well, it's not necessarily important to route everything perfectly, but the problem in this case is there's very little room back here to work with as far as stuffing cables back. So obviously having custom length cables helps quite a bit because you don't have a lot of excess cable space, but there's a lot going on back here for such a small build. So it was absolutely crucial that I tried to get my cables as best as I could. And I think I did. It was also important because this case doesn't latch. It's just magnets holding it on. So you can't even really jam anything in. It's got to lay flat enough that the door will close. So yeah, here's the back side. Again, as I said with the front, if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask in the comment section below. But I would say this is going to wrap up the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it was informative and inspirational. And I will catch you in the next video.